And I were comparing notes driving in this morning. We thought, well, there'll be 4 people here today, but I'm glad you you have surprised us, and you're here to be a part of session 2 of our summer series that I'm having the opportunity to teach. And I love doing this, and I'm hoping that this is helpful to all of you. And today we're going to do about 5 minutes of review. How many here were not here? Were not here last Sunday when we did this? Okay, we got quite a few. All right, very good. We're going to do a very brief review, but I want to tell everybody, hear me now, there will be a quiz at the end of this session. There is a test, all right? So I'm giving you a heads up. I'm being a nice guy. There will be a test. So welcome to United Methodist 101. And this is really my answer, my effort to answer questions that people tend to ask me over the years. And they fall into these 4 buckets. John Wesley's story, who is this guy I keep hearing about, and how are we connected to him? He's got a great story. That's what we're working on now. Our Disease and God's Cure, which will start next Sunday. And then, why did Jesus give us sacraments? We'll get into the sacrament conversation. How do we end up with 2 sacraments? What are they? What do they do? How do we understand them versus maybe other denominations? That's always a fun conversation to get into with a group of people. And then we're organized for what exactly? And by the time we get there, my prayer is that you know the answer to that question. But that's where we're going. So last week, we introduced John Wesley by telling you about his parents. Who were his parents? Samuel and Susanna Wesley. Now, we all are products of our family of origin, right? Mom and Dad had a lot to do with who we ended up being, and so, or whoever raised you had a lot to do with who you ended up being. Certainly the case for John Wesley. This is a famous painting of the moment when John was caught in a fire. Who set the fire? Dad's congregation. Dad, Samuel Wesley, was a parish priest. He ticked off the world, and the world pushed back several times. Twice they set fire to the parsonage. This time, John Wesley was a little boy caught on the 2nd story of this English thatch rectory, the parsonage, and barely made it out alive. And so this famous painting, I got a little pointer here, this famous painting shows, you got Samuel Wesley, that's Dad down here praying. You got Mom over here, Susanna, huddled with all the other kids, because there was about 9 of them, 10 of them. And then up here is little John getting pulled out of the blaze at the very last moment. You got some townspeople that are trying to put out the blaze. There's one guy over here trying to put a bucket together. But you can't see it on this particular screen image. Over here are the rest of the congregation who set the fire. That was a tough congregation, but there is the story that began the journey of Susanna recognizing God saved her little Jackie, is what she called John, her little Jackie for some special purpose, and she started spending a little more time with him. Now, this is an actual etching of John when he was probably in his 30s. Somebody made this picture. They didn't, obviously, no cameras, but I just want you to see him. That's him. He is a Church of England priest, an Anglican priest. That's his priestly collar and robe that he has on. I wanted to show you these 2 pictures because here's John a little later in life. And remember why, England, that hairstyle is not really a hairstyle that was known in England. Why is his hair that long? He couldn't afford the Tory wig, the white wig. So he just was this very practical man that said, well, I don't need to put anything on my head that God's already given me the ability to grow. So he is the first hippie among us. John lived and kept that hair, which eventually did turn white, but it's his own hair, as opposed to his brother Charles here you see wearing the traditional ministerial Tory wig. But anyway, and then I've got a picture here of John at the end of his life. A famous portrait. He sat for this portrait, so this is an actual portrait that was painted of him at the end of his life in England. He lived through the 1700s, lived a long life, about 88 years, and had a huge impact. I asked the question last time, and you guys got it right, because you're very smart people. I learned that last week. What else happened in the world in that time frame when John lived? Yeah, the American Revolution, which is a big part of the story we're going to tell today. Okay, so we ended last week with John Wesley's sad beginnings. He's got a Bachelor of Arts in philosophy, which is all that was required at that time to become an Anglican priest. He went on to get a BA, an MA, a Master's of Arts in theology. He was a master of 4 to 5 languages. He made it 5 when he learned Spanish on top of Italian, Greek, Hebrew, and something else that I can't remember. He's an Oxford Don. He's a college professor. He's an intellectual. Everything in his life is up here. Almost nothing is down here in his heart. And John's got a problem in that he still, as an Anglican priest, does not know if he is saved. He doesn't know. Imagine the frustration. Just imagine the frustration. And he's searching for something that he doesn't really even know totally what he's searching for. And he joins this group going to a radical place, the Georgia colony. Governor Oglethorpe had a colony established in Savannah, Georgia, and just close to Savannah, Georgia. And he needed a pastor, a priest for the colony, and he hired John for that purpose. And John took it because Dad wanted him to come back and spend his life as the pastor in the rectory in Epworth, and John was, I'm not spending my life in that place, and decided to take this trip. But he was really searching for what he was lacking in his spiritual life. And the journey across the big pond from England to across the Atlantic Ocean to Georgia, the ship runs into this big storm. John is scared to death he's going to die. And I think to put it in perspective, here, Stephen, I got to borrow you for just a minute. It would have looked like this. I'm going to die! I mean, John was terrified. The ship looked like it was not going to make it. And in the midst of his fear, in the midst of his terror, that was what I was trying to emphasize. I mean, he thinks he's going to die, and he doesn't know what's going to happen to him when he dies because he doesn't know if he's saved, right? He hears singing. Who's singing? Yeah, this immigrant group that's also on the boat heading over to that Georgia colony called, it's a group of Germans, the German Moravians, which is kind of a religious group of its own right, and they're singing, praising God in the midst of the storm. In the midst of the storm that is terrifying John. And he starts a conversation with these people. It's like, how can you possibly be singing and praising God in the midst of the storm? And that's when this conversation started of, he recognized these German Moravians have something that I do not have. And he's really trying to figure out what it is. That sets him ultimately on a journey after failing at virtually everything. He was supposed to be the priest for the colony. He failed at that because he wanted to be a missionary to the Native American Indians. He failed at being a missionary to the Native American Indians. That didn't work. He got in trouble with Governor Oglethorpe because Governor Oglethorpe said, I need you here in the colony and you're nowhere to be found. And then he started this relationship with Sophie Hopke, and she wanted to get married, and he pushed her away, and so she went and got married to somebody else, and that created a big thing when he refused to give her Holy Communion one Sunday at church. Whether it was out of spite or out of reason, you make up your own mind. And unfortunately, Sophie's uncle was the church, or was the colony's sheriff, in essence, the magistrate. And from that point forward, John's on the run. Failed ministry, failed professional life, failed spiritual life. I mean, he's at the lowest point in his life, and he hightails it back to England. He knows he can't get a job as a clergy person. I mean, who's going to appoint him now? Everything's gone wrong. He goes to a prayer meeting back in England. And whose prayer meeting is it? A Moravian prayer meeting. And Hilda, I did everything I could to give you as much of a push here of what can happen at a prayer meeting. It wasn't a worship service, it was just a prayer meeting, gathering together and pray together. And in that moment, in that time, John felt his heart strangely warm. Something happened to his heart that had never happened to him before in his life. And he realized in that moment that Christ did die for him on the cross, that God's sacrifice on that cross covered, yes, even his sins, that he was saved. And he knew for the first time in his life this joy of salvation, this joy of knowing I'm a child of God. And it changed everything. He called it his heart strangely warm. Now we're going to start new stuff. That was the whole boring stuff that we did last week, because this week is a little more fun. So first thing you need to know about John is he was super brilliant. He was a bright man. I mean, to learn that many languages, to be an Oxford College professor, he was very well educated. He was just a very brilliant man. So much so that one of the things that the Moravians taught him was to start spiritual journaling, writing down your day. John took it, like he does everything, to the extreme. And there's documentation, there's a letter from a very famous person in England that said John Wesley wouldn't even break wind without documenting that he did it. He wrote everything down. But, think of it as it's part journal, but it's part diary. And so John, being John, created his own language to write in. It was an early version of shorthand that no one could read, but he created it for him. This is his own written language. Nobody could read it until 1980. We have stacks and stacks and stacks of John, bless you, stacks and stacks and stacks of John Wesley journals that nobody could read until a grad student in 1980, Paul Heitzenreiter, cracked the code and deciphered his language, and then deciphered all of his journals. So we have John Wesley's life well documented. That's why we know the story. Okay? So I'm not making this up. This is literally from John's own hands, basically. So he's got this unique diary, and then he's got a brother that's got a talent. This is kind of funny. Charles Wesley is 4 or 5 years younger, I can't remember, but he's a younger brother of John. And Charles does have this sense of joy, the sense of beauty, the sense of music, the sense of creativity in him that is wild and crazy. And we know Charles today as the one who wrote so many hymns. He wrote the words to the hymns, right? You know some of the hymns. They're in your hymnal. If you open up the hymnals that we have today, and you go to hymn number 57, you find at the bottom of the page, not that you would ever do this in worship because I know you're paying so much attention to what's going on, but should you open it up and look at the very bottom, down here it says who wrote the words and who wrote the music. And amazingly, words by Charles Wesley, 1739, to "Oh, for 1,000 tongues we sing," right? How about this one? "Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the newborn King." That's Charles Wesley hymn. Let's see, how about this one? That's as much singing as I'm going to embarrass myself with. Christ the Lord is risen today. Hallelujah. That one that we sing. It's our core hymns. And Charles Wesley ended up writing, they will document 6,500 hymns, but we think it's closer to 10,000 because there's a bunch that we don't have. Incredible writer. But here's the thing. Now, as John and Charles are creating this movement that's about to come, Charles wasn't so much the musician as he was the writer of poems. So where did the music come from? Yeah, you can say it out loud. It's pub tunes. It's the songs, it's the melodies that the people already knew, because they're trying to connect with the people who are not in church, right? They're trying to connect, we'll see, with the poor folks who are not in church, and so they use melodies that were known to people already. But they put Charles's words to it, and we come up with, "Oh, for 1,000 tongues to sing my great Redeemer's praise." Beautiful hymns. It's been said, not that we would want this to happen, but if we lost the Bible, we could recreate it from Charles Wesley's hymns, because he pulls most of his theology directly out of Scripture that you'll find in his hymns. That's what makes a hymn rather than a pop song, is we're singing our faith. We're singing our faith. Okay, so let's get into something new. Charles Wesley's story. He was reading his Bible. I don't bring my physical Bible in here. He was reading his Bible, and he was looking at the Church of England that he is a priest in. And he's looking at the Bible, and it's saying all these things about the least of these and caring for the poor and for the widower and all of this. And he's looking at his church, and he's looking at the Bible, and he's looking at the Church of England. He's looking at the Bible, he's looking at the Church of England, and he sees a problem. What's the problem? None of those people are in that church, because the Church of England at the time was aristocracy, nobility, rich folks only. No one else was actually invited. And John was seeing this difference between what he's reading in his Bible and what he's seeing in his church. He's saying, this isn't right. And he ended up getting into some conversations with some higher level folks in the church saying, we've got a problem. We need to be taking our message to, we need to be inviting poor people in. That's what he started with. To which they said, no, no, we're not doing that. But John, if you have such a heart for them, why don't you go to them? Yeah, shut up and do it. And you know what he did? He did it. And that's the next rise of Methodism. So John started to preach this message of, it kind of sounds like the bullhorn guy on the corner that we might know today, but the message was basically of fleeing the wrath to come. And what he was really, his core message was, we need to be reflective of what Jesus is calling us to be in the church. And if we're not, we need to get out there and be that. Now, at the time, Industrial Revolution was starting to happen in England, 1750s. Steam was starting to happen. What do you need to make steam besides water? You need coal. And there's when the coal mines kicked off. Who works in the coal mines? Nobility or poor people, right? Who ends up in debtor's prison? People who have money or who do we need soup kitchens for? Nobility or? And so John starts going out into the world and preaching to people who would not come to church. And something strange happens. He started to gather people. It would be a little and then more and then more and then more, and it became this significant movement that caught the attention of the church. And the church would invite John to preach, guest preach at, some high steeple church. And John's diary is so amazing because he wrote in there, invited to preach at Oxford College, Christ Church, whatever, asked never to come back. And he would go to the next high steeple church, preached at blah, 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 and in his diary he'd write, asked never to come back. His message was not resonating with the people in the pews, right? He even got to the point where he preached in a field one time, and in his diary it literally says this, preached in blah, 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 blah city community in front of 200 and some people in this farmer's field. Farmer released pig, chased me out, told never come back. Do you start to get a sense of the stubbornness of John Wesley? He is an incredible guy. So there's a couple of neat pictures that I'm going to show. Matter of fact, I'm going to show this next one right now. When the church finally said, John, get out of here. We don't want you preaching inside our church. You know what he did? That's John Wesley. This is a painting, obviously. That's John preaching on his daddy's tombstone outside the church. He literally said, fine, I can't preach in here. You can't knock me off of this thing. And he preached on his father's tombstone outside. And again, started to draw a crowd. Okay. He started to organize these people into bands, classes, and societies. It's just small groups, bigger group, bigger group. And he did it in such magnificent fashion. And by the way, whose model is he using in bands, classes, and societies? It's the Moravians. Small groups, Small groups. Bands were specific to gender specific, so small groups of men, small groups of women. Classes where everybody's together, men and women. Societies are, there's multiple classes in this area, and once in a blue moon we need to meet together as a Methodist, as a society. And the word Methodist he never picked, it stuck because of those methodical people. They do soup kitchen at this time, they do debtor's prison at this time, you could set your watch by them. They're methodical people, so that's where that term Methodist came from. It was that term of derision that stuck to this organization that he put in place. Now, he originally was he started with, you know what? Hilda, you've got a story to tell. Today in class, what I need you to do is stand up and tell your story. And next week, the next person, the next person, the next person. So it was a witnessing kind of lay movement. But then it became quickly, we want to know more about this Jesus. And so John went back to the church and said, hey guys, I did it, what you said. I got all these people following. Now they need to hear the gospel. Come on. Come with me. I'll show you where to go. I'll show you where to meet them. I'll show you where they are. And the church said, heaven, no. No, we're not interested in doing that. So now John had a dilemma, and he solved the dilemma. He started training lay preachers. And what's a lay preacher? Kara, I'm going to train you to be able to do a sermon, to get up and talk about and expound on a piece of Scripture in the Bible. And you're going to become a lay preacher. Are you ordained to do it? No, because none of that's gone through the church. But John needs a whole bunch of lay preachers. He's been doing this for 12 years from his lowest point in his life, and he's got 10,000 people. 12 years, 10,000 people spread out across England in these bands, groups, and societies. So he trains a bunch of lay preachers, and this movement, because that's all it is, it's a lay movement within the Anglican Church is what John set out to do. This movement went through all of Great Britain, so you're talking about Scotland, Wales, Britain, and Ireland. The Ireland piece is important because of the potato famine, which caused a lot of Ireland to get up and leave Ireland and go where? Here. And it's kind of funny because there's a point in John's diary. I love reading his diary. I mean, when I'm bored, it's just one of those things that you do. But there's a point in his diary that says he gets this letter from the colonies, and it was from a church in Philadelphia. They're complaining about the pastor that John sent them. To which John in his diary said, I sent nobody to them. I don't even know that there's a church there. I don't even know. I didn't have anything to do with this. And that's when he started to realize this movement that he has gone global on him. People are taking it as they move and continuing the effort. But unfortunately, the War of Independence begins, and something rather unique happens. Now, I try really hard to differentiate what we believe today versus what we believed back then, and this is one of those times where I've got to differentiate. The belief back then in the church, in the Anglican Church was, if you don't have access to the sacraments, you will go to hell. Now, we don't believe that today, but that was the core belief back then. When the colonies started the rebellion, King George III, Grand Poobah back in England, pulled back all of the Anglican priests, the ordained priests, out of the colonies and brought them home. It was his way of saying, literally, let those rebels go to hell. Literally. John is still in England. He's got this global laity movement that's happening, and now he's got another dilemma. And what's his dilemma? I can't let these people go to hell. And he's trying to reconcile in his mind, and he figures out what he needs to do. And so in his diary, literally, in his diary it says, 10 a.m., ordained Thomas Coke for the Americas. And then it went on to other things. That's all it said. Now, John Wesley is just like me at this point. He's a pastor. Put it in terms that we can connect with. He's a pastor. He's not a bishop. He's not a higher up. He's just a a clergy person. He has no authority to ordain anybody. And yet, being John, he had one of his other Anglican pastors, a friend of his, Thomas Coke, who was also sympathetic to what was happening. And Thomas Coke agreed that he would go to the colonies and he would take the sacraments with him. And so he knelt in John Wesley's study. John Wesley put his hands on him, invoked the Holy Spirit, and ordained him, listen to the term, superintendent to the Americas for the Methodist movement. Thomas Coke got up, got on the boat, went across the pond. The joke is, when he went on the boat, he was superintendent. When he got off the boat, he was magically a bishop. Which very frustrated, ticked off the Wesleys big time, both John and Charles. Thomas Coke literally would ordain lay preachers in the colonies, lay hands upon them, ordain them to do the sacraments, so nobody's going to hell. Well, Charles Wesley, being the poet that he is, there was a little ditty that he wrote that was published. I cannot remember the exact words. I have it written, I had it recorded here, but Charles Wesley wrote a poem that went like this. It rhymed when he wrote it. It's not going to rhyme when I say it, but it was, the Roman emperor, it has been said, created a consort out of his horse. Thomas Coke, as we found out, created a bishop out of his ass. Now, he's referring to the donkey, but, yeah, just so you know, things are getting out of the Wesleys' hands, is what I'm getting at. This thing is starting to get away from them. They started this lay movement in the Anglican Church, and it's starting to get away from them. So Thomas Coke goes to the Americas. He finds Francis Asbury. A lot of people know Francis Asbury in the Methodist history of things. He's a very important person because Francis was one of the lay preachers, one of the lay-trained preachers that Wesley had sent from England. He's originally from England. But when things got dicey in the colonies and everybody came back, Asbury stayed in the colonies. Now, think that through for a minute. If you were a Tory, if you were an Englander during the Revolution, you were not thought highly of. Matter of fact, they wanted to kill you. So Francis Asbury hid literally in the marshes and in the bayous during the Revolutionary War, and then when the war was over, basically came out of hiding. But he stayed here in the Americas. And when Thomas Coke got to the Americas, he ended up connecting with Asbury, and Asbury was the first American, because he stayed here, that they ordained another bishop, made him another bishop. And it was Asbury and his effort, bless you, Shannon, his effort on horseback that took the Methodist movement into the frontier. So on December 24th, that's Christmas Eve, 1784, word went out to all of the Methodist lay preachers or ordained preachers or just preachers in general. They were lay preachers at that point. Come to this conference we're having in Baltimore, Maryland. It's going to be at a church called the Lovely Lane Chapel. It's going to be on Christmas Eve. Everybody come. Get on your horses and come, because we're going to begin the new church, the Methodist Episcopal Church at Lovely Lane Chapel on December 24th. And in a 10-day conference, they did it. That's a famous, again, etching, not a picture, but an etching. What you're seeing is, that is Francis Asbury being ordained as a bishop to the new Methodist Episcopal Church, the MEC, the Methodist Episcopal Church. Whenever you hear the word Episcopal, that means bishop. So we are a church set up with bishops. So Wesley decided or found out, I'm losing control of this thing. When we actually won our independence from Britain, Wesley had a dilemma. He still wanted to have control over what was happening, but they're now a separate country apart from England. So he solved it, like he solved all of his dilemmas. He decided he would send forward an organizational book. It would be the discipline that would be used to order this new church. And he put a lot of thought into it. He spent time learning this new colony, how they were structured. And they have this thing called a presider. President. And they have this thing called a legislature that makes laws. And they have this thing called a judicial system. So, Wesley set up the organization of the church that he's handing off to the folks in the Americas with a presider. That's the bishop's role. With a legislation. That is what we call general conference, when you open up potentially and make changes to our book of law, the book of discipline. And then for in-between conferences, if questions come up of did we follow the law or not, there's a judicial system, including a Supreme Court called the Judicial Council. He mimicked exactly what we were as a new country as he laid out the structure for the new church so that we could connect with it. And the next thing he did is he said, by the way, this is the current book of discipline, our book of rules, the brown book, not the black book, the brown book. This is the 2020-2024. It goes for 4 years, and at the end of 4 years, we have a general conference to open it up and redo anything that needs to be redone. We can change rules. We can't change our Constitution much, but we can change some rules in here and some things. But every 4 years, where did he get that idea? Our general conference happens the same year we do presidential elections. And the quadrennium word that we use refers to every 4 years is actually the presidential cycle of the new American. So he did everything he could to try to make it as connective to who we radical, rebellious people were, which was, again, a touch of brilliance. And to this day, when I was ordained, one of the gifts that I was given is this plaque. It isn't really about me, it's about the lineage. Think with me for a minute. If you're Catholic, who was the first bishop of the church? The first pope, the first leader of the church, Peter himself. So in the Catholic tradition, the lineage of the bishops, it's the fisherman's ring that's being passed down, Peter's ring that's being passed down, right? So the lineage goes all the way back to Peter. In the Methodist Church, our lineage goes back to who? John Wesley. So this plaque I was given is my ordination lineage. So at the bottom is my name, and I was ordained by Bishop Watson, who was ordained by this bishop, who was ordained by this bishop, who was ordained by this bishop, who was ordained by Francis Asbury in 1784, who was ordained by Thomas Coke in 1784, and at the top of my ordination is the name John Wesley. So many, many years ago, people used to make fun of Methodists because we're grounded in nothing. Well, we claim we're grounded in the Spirit of God, moving through ordinary people like John Wesley. Was John a saint? About as far from it as he could possibly get, but he's a very intelligent man who cared deeply for people, yes. And he tried to connect the Gospels as he understood them to a lay movement that literally got away from him and became this church that we know now today. A church, that's a picture or a supposed painting of what it might have looked like to be a Methodist circuit rider. Circuit riders. Y'all have heard the story of the guys on horseback that would ride everywhere and take the gospel with them and spread the gospel around. Those were Methodist preachers that were part of our early history in the frontier. It was said that after the sound of an axe cutting down a tree to build a log cabin, the next sound was the sound of a circuit rider coming over the hill to bring the good news of Jesus Christ to you on the frontier. We were a frontier movement. As the frontier moved from the original 13 colonies forward, the Methodist movement went right with it because this is the way we were structured. We were told Methodist preachers couldn't be married because we don't want any anchors. We don't want a home that you have to go back to. You were supposed to own 3 things: a horse, a Bible, and a satchel to put the Bible in and anything else that you need, like maybe sermon notes. That was it. And you had a circuit that you were appointed to. You were appointed to hit a certain space, a certain regional area. And you literally rode, you didn't stay in one place. You did your day and you moved on, you did your day, you moved on, you did your day, you moved on. Literally chasing the people wherever the people went. That's our heritage, that's our DNA, that's our roots. If that's Francis Asbury, it's been said, somebody to put the math to it, based on his documentation of where he went, on horseback, Francis Asbury traveled 270,000 miles on horseback. Never sat down. Keep moving. Don't ever sit down. Okay, I had one other picture here that I wanted to show you. This is John Wesley preaching in an open field when his movement in England started to take off. The reason why that's important to lift up is that was illegal. You remember the whole, we're Catholic now we're Protestant, then we're Catholic, then we're Protestant, and every time we changed monarchs, there was a bloodbath and bad things happened. Well, part of the agreement that said we're going to go the middle way with the Elizabethan agreement was there'll be no more open field preaching. The only preaching that's going to happen is where we can watch it, which is in the church building. Right? So there'll be no more radical preaching out there in the fields. Well, John broke that rule pretty quickly and decided this was where he could actually accumulate people. But know his heart. Methodism took off where there were coal mines. Methodism took off where there were people who had no hope. Methodism took off where people did not have access to the aristocracy of church. Methodism took off missional to debtor's prison. You know how debtor's prison worked back then? If you couldn't pay your bills, they threw you in prison until you could. Now, figure that out for a minute. The way that really worked is until somebody who knew you or part of your family sold something to get you out of debtor's prison, you were stuck. And so there was just a huge injustice in that cycle. Wesley's heart was a missional heart. Yes, evangelistic, yes, but a missional heart. It's seeing people that Jesus would see that the world doesn't see. That was our whole DNA. Now think about this for a minute. As we go back to the DNA here at the very bottom, I want to touch on the DNA of the Methodist movement, what we've held on to. See how many connections you can make. First of all, to become a pastor in the United Methodist Church, you have to, at bare minimum, have a master's degree of divinity, which means you have an undergraduate degree and a graduate degree. And they prefer you to have a doctorate, honestly, but they stop the requirement at a master's degree. You and I both know there are denominations out there that if I feel God saying I should preach the Word of God on Saturday night, I'll be in a pulpit on Sunday morning. For me, the process was 9 years. The joke is you can become a brain surgeon faster than you can become a Methodist preacher. Why? Because you're going to be educated. That was part of our DNA. Where did that come from? Yeah, the Wesleys. John gave us the general rules. There were 3 general rules. Every confirmation class, I always teach these because it's always fun to tell the kids, go home and ask your parents if they know the 3 general rules of the church, because hardly anybody does, and the kids kind of get to go, well, I do, and have a little fun with that. But John gave us these 3 general rules that really define our understanding of our faith. Rule number 1, do no harm. Do no harm. Now, you can probably do rule number 1 if you stayed in your bedroom and didn't go anywhere, right? But rule number 2 makes that a little hard, because rule number 2 says, do all the good you can. Do no harm, do all the good you can. And rule number 3, which to this day is, these are still the general rules of the United Methodist Church. Come on in, folks. Do no harm, do all the good you can, and then Bishop Joad made it simpler to remember, stay in love with God, but Wesley was participate in the ordinances of God, which are come to worship, read the Bible, pray, be in fellowship with other Christians, and partake in Holy Communion as often as you can. Those are the 5 means of grace, if you will. So what are the 3 general rules of our church? Oh, you're supposed to know them now. Stay in love with God. Go with that one. It's easier to remember. Stay in love with God. And then somebody will ask you, well, how do I stay in love with God? Then you can go deeper. Okay, so there's our DNA. Missional and evangelistic. Missional means we care about people. We're trying to help people who need help to participate in their lives. John Wesley actually wrote many books, but only one took off and was hugely popular. The name of that book, and I've got a copy in my study here, and I forgot to bring it, is Primitive Physics. It's not a physics book. It's a book of herbal remedies, because they didn't have access to health care. They didn't have access to doctors. When something went wrong, they had to deal with it themselves. I'm talking about the poor folks of Britain. So he wrote a book for them where he accumulated all the home remedies, the stuff you have on the shelf at home, what you can do and how you can do it. To this day, it is his bestseller. To this day, it's still in print. You can Google Primitive Physics, John Wesley, and you can order the book online. And I've got one in my office that's really bizarre, some of the remedies, but it was what they could do so that he could help people who were in need. Grace-based theology we'll get into next week. Scripture-focused. John claimed to be a man of one book, the Bible, but it was documented that he read over 10,000 books. How many books have you read? 10,000 books in his day by candlelight, no less. Physical health was important, practical theology, focus on the poor, and finances. A famous quote, you've all heard it probably. Earn all you can. This is John Wesley. Earn all you can. Save all you can. Give all you can. And on and on and on. Why? Debtor's prison. Debtor's prison. And the whole Methodist movement against alcohol early in the days, where'd that come from? Well, what was the biggest societal evil among the poor people? Gin. It was gin. So there's our heritage and our roots. It was their meth. It was their cheap high to deal with life. So John was very early on trying to deal with all the societal evils of life. So I think you're ready to take a quiz, don't you? All right. These are true and false questions, but I'm going to ask you. True or false, John Wesley is the father of Methodism? I will personally argue that that is false. Susanna. Where did he learn all this discipline? Where did he learn all this structure? Where did he learn that education was the silver bullet to changing the world? From Mom. Now, every book will tell you the father of Methodism is John Wesley, but personally, to me, the father of Methodism, the true beginning of Methodism, was Susanna Wesley and her desire to teach her children. Now you got an idea of how tricky these are going to be, right? True or false, John Wesley wanted to start a new church denomination. Completely false. He wanted to start a lay movement out of the Church of England, out of the Anglican Church. True or false, John Wesley is a Methodist. John Wesley died an Anglican priest. He never became a Methodist. The father of Methodism never became a Methodist. He's an Anglican priest. All right, here comes the big one. Are you ready? True or false? I can tell the short version of our origin story to other people who do not yet know it. You don't have to do it in 2 sessions, but can you give the gist of our story to somebody? Where we came from now? I'm seeing some people shake their heads yes, so I'm going to call that a victory. All right. So that's an awful lot about the flavor of where we came from. It was a different time. It was a different age. The cultures were different. But it gives you this sense of we're kind of a rebellious people. From time to time, you hear me refer in a sermon to the rebellion of the redeemed. That resonated with Wesley, with John. He's like, there's the system and there's institutional church, but it doesn't seem to be helping the people who need help. Does this sound the least bit familiar to what Jesus ran into? Which is where John Wesley said all of his justification was coming directly from Scripture. When he sat down and ordained Thomas Coke, he literally wrote in his diary, He was justified doing it based on Acts chapter 4. This was the Acts church all over again, the movement of the Holy Spirit through the people of God. And we end up with this thing called the Book of Discipline. We end up with conferences where all the people come together once a year. We don't ride our horses anymore, but it's the same concept. We have General Conference, which writes the Book of Discipline, the rules of the church. We meets once every 4 years still, and I wish they would change this one day. On the year that we have the presidential campaign, we also have all of the conversation about the Book of Discipline. We still have clergy that, well, in a traditional setting, a United Methodist pastor wears what? Robe and stole. Where'd that come from? The Catholic tradition, right? Because the Church of England, Catholicism, it's literally, we're part of that whole journey, we're grounded still in Mother Church. That's why the robe and the stole. That's why the liturgy. Where did we get the Apostles' Creed? Came from Mother Church. But do we have a pope? No. We have bishops, yes, but bishops are presiders. Bishops, by law, in the Book of Discipline, cannot speak for the United Methodist Church. They can speak to the United Methodist Church, and people confuse those two things. But they can't speak for. The only thing that we can say we are is whatever we agree to at General Conference in the Book of Discipline. It's just the methodical Methodist way of doing things. So we're still very methodical. Who came up with the concept of preschools to begin with before it became the vogue thing to do and everybody did it? The Methodist tradition did. Why? Our DNA. You want to change the world? Educate people. It is the silver bullet to change the world. So we pushed education right down to the minute they, just like Susanna said, the minute they could read, they were expected to learn the whole alphabet, it's our DNA. And just knowing where we come from, knowing who we have been, it kind of helps understand those things that are important to us. And, when we get into things like social justice issues, why is that important to us? Well, number one is because it was important to Jesus, but number two, it's how we were formed, literally, caring for the poor, caring for the disenfranchised, caring for those who were the least of these, trying to educate the world, moving forward in the kingdom growth. All of those things are right from the Wesleys, and we would not have them if it was not for that family. I hope that I didn't bore you again today, and I hope you come once again next week, because next week we will get into a little of this word that scares people, theology. But I don't teach theology. I try to teach understanding of what's important to us. We're going to talk about grace, and we're going to talk about what Wesley gave us in our understanding of grace. That doesn't sound like it would hurt too much, does it? And we're going to try to understand very simply what it was he was fighting against and what we still are fighting against to this day in our understanding of our unique United Methodist understanding of our faith. I hope you come.